Welcome to the Hope After Child Loss podcast, where we endeavor to offer stories of hope to grieving parents and siblings so that they might rediscover life filled with meaning, purpose, and hope. We invite you to come and join us. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hope After Child Loss. I'm your host, Greg Buffkin, and today my guest is Chris Locke. Chris is a real estate attorney up in the state of Delaware. And Chris, we are very honored and glad to have you as our guest today.
Thank you, Greg. It's nice to be here with you.
Great. Well, listen, Chris, why don't you spend a couple of minutes and just tell us a little bit about you and what you do and a little bit about your family?
Okay. As you said, I am a real estate attorney, but for the last 20 years, I've been kind of a real estate developer here in Newark, Delaware. We do a lot with the University of Delaware, and also kind of a serial entrepreneur. I've had many different businesses that my family and I have run. One of the things most people know me for is the tuxedo guy. My wife has a tuxedo store here on Little Old Main Street in Newark, about 35 years. So if you ever need a tuxedo, I'm your guy.
I'll remember that. You can just send it to me via UPS down to South Carolina, right?
Sounds good. But really, my greatest passion is being married to my wife, and we have 6 wonderful children. And that is definitely what I consider my greatest occupation, which is being a dad. We have 6 children, ages from 18 to 32. So quite a spread.
Wow. That would keep one busy.
Yes, and it has. And for the first time, my wife and I are empty nesters. Our 18-year-old just went off to college. So I'm experiencing that for the first time. It's a blended family. I had 3 kids. She had 1. We had 2 together. So we have never known married life without children under our roof. So we're exploring that new opportunity, as they would say.
Well, congratulations to this newfound opportunity for freedom that my wife and I have been experiencing and enjoying that as well. And it's a great place to be once again.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. It's a new chapter in our lives, and we're just trying to figure out what does that mean. So it's good.
Yeah.
Luckily, we are happily married, and she's my best friend. So I can't imagine going through this phase of life without being in love and having a best friend to go through it with. That's for sure.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm with you on that, Chris.
Yeah.
That's great, man. Well, listen, one of the things that we have in common, unfortunately, is that we both have lost a child to suicide. Chris lost his son, Sean. I think it was 5 years ago now, right?
July 18th, 2018.
Yeah. So, Chris, why don't you take a few minutes and just tell us a little bit about Sean? Tell us who he is and a little bit about your life together.
So he was our 3rd child. He was the younger brother of Catherine and Kevin and the older brother of Victor, Aiden, and Patty.
Yeah.
And he was kind of the bigger-than-life person in the family. Sean was always very good athletically, just as his brothers and sisters were. But he actually took it to a whole nother level. He succeeded in high school sports, both at basketball and baseball. And so good that he had college offers to play either sport and decided to play college basketball at the University of Delaware. But he was more than just an athlete. He was just a kid that had a big smile. He was involved in a lot of different extracurricular things at his schools. And he was a kid that people just kind of gravitated to. He was everybody's best friend, as my daughter would say. He, for all his success, he never let it go to his head. He was always a very humble person, always, just was a good guy. I remember getting an email from one of his teachers at St. Mark's, and she said that some kids had done something in the hallway, and she noticed the kids kind of ran away, and there was Sean by himself in the hallway, and he just picked up the mess that they left. Wasn't doing anything. So he was just that kid.
Yeah.
And And he was very successful in everything he did. He was a 3-time academic All-American, played in March Madness against Michigan State, was named captain of the team his senior year, graduated with honors, and had a great job when he graduated. Um, you know, 6'4", blonde hair, blue eyes, and had the
Hmm.
world all in front of him to do what he wanted. Got a great job when he graduated. So as a dad, I thought, okay, we're good. He's
Yeah.
well on his way to a great life. I've done my job, and he's left the nest, and all will be well. But for all of his accomplishments, he did not deal with his mental health, and was battling with depression and anxiety, unbeknownst to us. We didn't know. He did not share this battle with anybody except for maybe 2 friends at one point. But he also kind of pushed it away, say, "I got it. I'm good. No big deal." So he suffered in silence, and I don't think he planned to end his life that day. Something happened in the afternoon of the 18th of July, and within a 45-minute window from the time he decided to end his life, he ended his life. It was a very spontaneous decision, which most suicides are. The movies kind of make it like it's a planned event, and some are, but for the most part, it is a very spontaneous, rash decision.
Yeah.
Um, so,
And I think, Chris, let me stop you there for a second, and just because I think you just hit on something really important that I think is sometimes misunderstood, especially in younger men. I I do think, like you, that that it often, and probably most often, is just something that they decided on the spur of the moment
yep.
without any planning, but just were not in a place to think it through. And I think probably some of that is part and parcel with depression and anxiety, because you're not thinking
Yep.
rationally about things like that.
You're absolutely. The disease is a horrible disease,
Yeah.
and before we lost Sean, I knew nothing about mental illness, but it is a disease, and the way I explain it is, your heart attacks you when you have heart disease, your blood attacks you when you have cancer, and your brain will attack you when you have depression, anxiety, any sort of mental illness, to the point that you find yourself in a situation that you truly believe that the best alternative is to end your life, that you cannot imagine going another day with this disease. Um,
Right.
we as humans, we all want to live forever.
Yeah.
But when we lose someone to suicide, it's really the antithesis of who we are as human beings. And we
Yeah.
can't really wrap our brain around how could someone who I loved so much decide to make this decision. Um, I've talked to a lot of people who have attempted to end their life. And I asked them, aren't you thinking about mom and dad? Aren't you thinking about your brothers and sisters, your friends? And they said, no. All I'm thinking about, I got to end the despair. I have to end the darkness now. And I cannot wait, because if I wait, then I have to go another day, another month, another year with this darkness and despair. So they feel this urgency to complete the act.
Yeah. I think unless you've ever experienced that for yourself, or had, I was going to say had a loved one who experienced it, but I think unless you've actually experienced depression in your own life, I don't think people realize how deep and dark that hole can be that people find themselves in, and just don't know how to climb out of it, short of what you just said, ending their own life because they see no hope.
It's so true. And I've talked to so many moms and dads who will call me about their child and say, look, he's just lazy. He can't get out of bed. He can't hold a job. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, it's not him. It's not his character. It's not who he is as a person. It's the disease that's doing it. And a lot of times I'll say, what would you do if your son or daughter was in bed because she had leukemia or he had leukemia? You would do whatever it took to find the right medicine, the right therapy, whatever the case may be, to get them healthy. That's how you got to look at depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
They don't want to just stay in bed. They don't want to lose the jobs they lose. It's a disease that just can't make them function the way they know they can.
Yeah. I wonder, as far as we have come from where we were just a few decades ago with mental health disorders, I wonder why we still have that perspective that somehow mental illness is different than other diseases. As you just said, if that child had leukemia, you would do whatever it took to address that, help them get out of bed. But for some reason, we tend to categorize mental health in a whole different way that's not healthy, and therefore very often, I think far too often, people, whether they're young or even older, don't get the help that they need because there's this social stigma that shouldn't be there, because the brain is an organ just like any other organ in the body. If you had a kidney illness, you would be seeing a kidney specialist. If you had liver disease, you would be seeing a specialist. But for some reason, when it comes to mental illness, we think you don't want people to know that you're going to a psychiatrist or to a counselor, for goodness sake, because people might talk about us behind our back.
But I think that's the problem. The stigma is so great for a couple reasons. One, because we know so little still about mental illness.
Yeah.
We know little about how does one get depression, anxiety in the family, but maybe three others don't. And we have done very little research on mental illness in comparison to other disease. We'll lose over 50,000 people to suicide this year. 50,000 people. And they say for every suicide, it's going to affect 400 people. So you're talking about millions of people that will be affected by the loss of the loved one. Then you take the drug addiction issue that we deal with in this country. We'll lose 150,000 people to overdoses of fentanyl poisoning because of drugs. And so many people who are dealing with depression and anxiety, they're going to self-medicate. They're going to self-medicate through alcohol or risky behavior or a combination of both, and which will lead to drug use. And, look, I used to think about the person out on the street, and I would say, what the heck, man, get a job, get a life. But what I have realized now over the last 5 years, they're dealing with mental health issues. And they have gone years, if not decades, to find themselves in a situation that they are homeless, that they are a drug addicted. So now they're dealing with a substance abuse issue, and they've never gotten the underlying problem under control, which is the mental health issues.
Exactly.
But we spend such little money on trying to resolve this problem. And I am hopeful. We started, as you and I have talked to offline, we started this foundation called SL24. And, in these 4 years of doing the foundation, I am hopeful that the next generation is going to change it, And you're right. If you and I in our professional careers told our boss that we were seeing a psychiatrist, it was a career ender. You were done, And if our fathers and our grandfathers forget about it, they didn't even bring it up.
Right.
So I am hopeful that my children and then their children, most importantly, will be able to speak about this like we speak about all the other diseases. Because one thing I've learned is, we never talked about eating disorders until Karen Carpenter passed away in the 80s.
That's true.
And we looked at AIDS a lot differently until Magic Johnson came out publicly and told everybody he had AIDS. So, and you can even go back to the 60s and 70s and how society dealt with breast cancer and all that. And it took famous people, quote unquote, to really bring it. And you're starting to see that with mental illness. Some athletes are talking about it. We have a thing called Sean's House here in Newark, where it's a place where young adults can come and have these open and honest conversations. We've had 20,000 kids come through the doors in the first 3 years that we've had Sean's House.
Wow.
And is creating the environment to not suffer in silence, to be able to have that first conversation and then find the resources. And that's the second issue of this thing. So first you got to end the stigma through education and having an open conversation. But then we've got to have those mental health professionals and those licensed social workers to be there to help them when they want to have that conversation. And there's a shortage of mental health professionals around the country for a litany of reasons. And that's going to be the next thing. And then we have to, create spaces, create environments where people can say, man, I am struggling. I need help. And then be
Yeah.
able to get them the help. So, one thing I've learned too is people who have mental illness actually feel guilty for having the disease.
Yeah.
You look at their life and what do I have to be depressed about? Why do I feel this way? Why can I not feel joy? And they feel guilty to the point that they don't want to burden anybody with their disease. So they stay silent. And it's a travesty. It's a travesty in our family. It's a travesty in our town and in our country.
Yep. And the funny thing is we don't feel guilty about heart disease. We don't feel guilty about hypertension or kidney disease.
Or cancer. Right?
Or cancer. Yeah. Exactly.
I read an article, Glenn Close's sister suffers with mental illness. And Glenn Close talked about, if my sister had cancer, people would be coming in, dropping off, food and support and all that. But when they find out she has bipolar, they stay away. And it's true. We deal with it differently.
Yeah, we do. And the shameful part of it, or part of the shame in it, is that there are medications that actually can make a difference. There are procedures now that have been discovered over just the last few years. I know there's a treatment now that uses ketamine. That ketamine for so many years was used as a drug in anesthesia. It is incredibly effective. As a matter of fact, I have a nephew who has started getting ketamine treatment for his treatment-resistant depression. And he said for the first time in 15 years, he feels like there's hope again. And yet, unfortunately, it hasn't been approved by the FDA yet for treating depression. And so patients have to pay an extremely high fee to have this procedure done.
You've hit on many, many issues. 85 to 90% of the people who have depression and anxiety will respond positively to some medication. Now, you may have to tweak it, and there is kind of a hunt and search for the right dosage and the right and all that. But 85, 90% eventually respond positively. And as you say, there are other types of things for those who do not respond positively. Ketamine, the Amen Clinic up in New York City is doing some amazing things. There's all sorts of places that we can help, And the other thing you talk about is health parity. One of the things we've worked on here is making sure that there's health parity for physical illness as well as mental illness. So you can use your insurance when you're dealing with mental health issues, because so many times you have to pay out of pocket. You may get reimbursed someday, and you may not.
Someday.
Yeah, depending on. And that's the challenge here, that we deal with this as a disease.
Right. Yeah. And the other part that I think people don't understand is, going back to, there is a lack of mental health professionals in our communities. The bigger cities those resources are going to be there. But when you get out into the rural areas, those are a lot fewer and further between. And a lot of people don't understand that the reimbursement to those medical professionals, the psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, it's not as fair to those medical professionals as to the other MDs who treat more of the physical.
Right.
So that needs to be changed in our culture as well. There needs to be a greater level of cooperation with mental health resources in corporations who provide their employees with the medical benefits, because often that part lags behind the physical benefits and even the drug benefits.
Yeah, you have to take it from the payee point of view and the payor point of view, in the sense that the person who's getting the benefits and the employer who's paying for the benefits need to contact their insurance company and say, look, we want to offer this. How do we do this? And then you have to talk to the mental health professionals with the insurance company and say, look, Her bill is $140 an hour, but you're only willing to pay $60 an hour, $70 an hour. Where's the disparity? You wouldn't do that to a pediatrician. You wouldn't do it to a general practitioner. So why is it being so discounted when dealing with a mental health professional? And you make a very good point about rural America, but you can even talk about the inner city of America. Where there is poverty, there is a dearth of mental health professionals.
Absolutely.
There's usually trauma. And when you have trauma, you have mental health issues. And we have they are wastelands for when it comes to mental health professionals. And they are the ones who suffer the most. And then we'll try anything to try to get them through that darkness and despair.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, what do you think, Chris, that, a lot of times it seems obvious that in those situations you just described, where there's poverty, where there's homelessness, you would expect a higher level of depression and anxiety to run through that population. But that's not your son, Sean. No. And that was not our son, Ryan, right, who also suffered from depression and anxiety, who took his life. So people need to understand that it's no respecter of person.
No,
it seems to happen randomly. Like you said, sometimes one kid in the family can have it, the others don't.
Right.
And sometimes it can skip a generation, being passed along to children by parents.
It can, and you make such a good point, and that's part of the stigma. We assume because a kid has everything, a great job, success. I mean, Sean had a phenomenal life.
Right.
You got nothing to be depressed about, but that's the stigma. We're not recognizing it's a disease. You can be a great basketball player and get cancer, and you can be a great musician and have heart disease. So why can't you be great at something and get depression or anxiety or bipolar? And that's the issue. I believed all this stuff before we lost Sean. I thought it was the kid who, sat in the cafeteria by himself, herself, didn't have a lot of friends. It wasn't the Sean's of the world. But what I have found in this journey, that tends to be more. It tends to be the kid that does seem like he has it all, because the expectation he or she puts on themselves adds stress to the life. And when you have stress in one's life, you are more prone to have some mental health issues pop up at some point in your life.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going back to something you said a minute ago, triggered this thought that a lot of times we think of depression as just emotional. What we don't realize, or we're not acknowledging, is that it is, as you say, a disease of the brain.
Right.
The brain has so many chemicals flowing through it. And when something gets out of kilter,
that's it.
Then it kind of sets into motion a lot of things that aren't working in cooperation with the others. And you've got low levels of this and too high levels of that. And it's not about just, well, you shouldn't be feeling depressed about this, or you shouldn't be feeling this way about that. You don't say that about about the other part of the body that's sick.
Right.
It's just, it happens.
And I don't know whoever came up with the term depression or anxiety, but I think you really hit it. When we hear depression, we think it's a feeling, sadness. When we hear anxiety, we think it's a feeling, worry. It's not. We're sad at times and we're worried at times, but that sadness, that worry will not debilitate us to function in life.
Exactly.
But the disease debilitates you so that you cannot function in life. And that's, I met a woman who said, we got to stop talking about, mental illness and say it's a brain disease. Depression is a brain disease. Anxiety is a brain disease. Bipolar is a brain disease.
Right.
That's how we got to think about this. This is a brain disease. It doesn't care that Sean lived every guy's dream of being a Division I basketball player and played in March Madness. That has nothing to do with it.
Right.
It has nothing to do that he had a great future ahead and, he was blessed with so many gifts, because he had a disease. And that's we as a society, we still are struggling with depression equals sadness, anxiety equals worry. And we got to cut that because they're two different things.
Yeah. And often what goes unseen are the physical manifestations of that disease.
Yep.
The people that battle depression often have a lot of problems with sleep, either too much sleep, too little sleep. And once that happens, that in itself then triggers other issues.
Yep.
It causes brain fog. And, we hearken back to the COVID days when people would talk about how COVID created this brain fog.
Right.
Well, people that battle with depression, they've been battling with brain fog forever.
Yeah.
But it never has been really associated with depression until now. All of a sudden, we've got COVID, and COVID gets plenty of attention for brain fog. And people that have experienced that with COVID, can you imagine having that brain fog for a few weeks and then applying that to somebody who has depression, who deals with that on a regular basis, especially if they're untreated,
Right.
or if treatment just is not being effective?
Yep. For months and for years, they're dealing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and most of the times they are dealing with it by themselves. They're not expressing it to anybody. And they're sitting there going, what the heck is wrong with me? Why can I not think and do the simplest task? And you said something earlier about physical health. I mean, when you have a brain disease, it will transpire into physical ailments as well, whether they're real or not real. Your brain is using what's going on there and saying your knee hurts you because, and that's like what's
Right.
going. And if you're an athlete and you're dealing with physical stuff, so you cannot do the things that you were so easily able to do, that's going to cause mental illness as well. NCAA did research years ago that 30% of all college athletes are going to deal with depression within the last year or 1 year right out of their playing days. If your playing career ends because of an injury, ACL, concussion, that number goes up to 50%. 50% of the athlete, because their identity is who they are. We see these kids as a basketball player, football player, volleyball player, whatever the case may be, and they buy into it. And our society today is so sports driven. And I love sports, coached baseball for 20 years, coached basketball for 20 years. I love sports. But it's gotten to the point where as an 8 and 9-year-old, they are identified as this particular athlete.
Right.
And success in that sport, we start putting them on a pedestal. So to the point where they can't get off that pedestal. So look, I'm just a regular kid dealing with the same stuff that every other kid is dealing with, and I need help. I spoke to a football player who played at Alabama, and he stopped playing football after his sophomore year. And I asked him, I said, what was that like? He said, my dad didn't talk to me for 6 months. He goes, he was mad at me for quitting, quote unquote quitting. But he knew that it was the right decision because mentally it was not the right thing for him. And that's why he had left the sport he loved and was so identified by his friends, his family, his community. I mean, I'm sure he was, the hero of the small town he came from because he got to play for the University of Alabama football team. What the heck? The kid's leaving after 2 years. So there's a lot of layers to this whole thing.
Yeah, and I think it's so important, particularly with those kids that are really good athletes, that start receiving the accolades and the trophies and the recognition, to keep them grounded, helping them understand that even though this is something that it is important to you, people enjoy this, people are proud of you, it's not your identity.
Exactly right.
Because there will be a time after sports.
Right.
And if that's all you've got, then life is going to go downhill pretty quickly after that. And that can precipitate the depression and the anxiety and just feeling absolutely lost.
Yep. One of the things we do here at Sean's house is we have a dinner for high school athletes and then another dinner for college athletes. And we have one rule when you come to the dinner. We get anywhere from 25 to 40 athletes come to these dinners. We do it every other week. The one rule is you are not allowed to speak about your sport. We don't care
Ah,
what you did on Friday night or Saturday morning. We don't care. You come in as a person, and we're trying to teach them some life skills that you are more than your particular sport. And, I used to, as a guy who loved sport, if I saw college, I always talk about their sport. Now, what I try to deliberately do is not speak about their sport, but speak about who they are as a person. What are they thinking about life? What do they want to do with their life? What's their spiritual journey? Whatever the case may be in subject, but try to stay
man.
away from their sport so that they can accept it as who they are as a human being and not as an athlete.
Man, that is so good, Chris. I think that's so important because very few people in our culture are willing to speak into that kind of truth into the life of an athlete because we worship athletics in this country. There's a fine balance between enjoying and honoring those, but not worshiping them and not making them feel like that they are worthy somehow of worship. Only God deserves our worship.
Well, and look, I speak from my mistakes. I'm sitting here 5 years after losing Sean. You ask anybody who knew me before I lost Sean, I was that intense parent. I was that parent, on the sideline saying, you got to win, you got to score, you got to be the best. So I learned from my mistakes. And wisdom does come with age. And I look back now at how intense I was maybe in my 30s and 40s with my kids in sports. And I see with my younger friends, they're just as intense. But
Yeah.
there seems to be a whole nother level of intensity with all these travel teams and families giving up their lives, to go
Uh,
all over the country to play in a stupid game where they're being told, oh, you have to play because there's going to be recruiters and this and that. And, you show up in some baseball diamond in Pennsylvania and nobody's there but the parents, you
yeah.
know, and these parents are spending so much money on these travel teams that any good coach will tell you, we want an athlete who plays multiple sports and are not focused on one.
Yeah.
Sean and all his brothers and sisters played 4 or 5 different sports throughout a year. And none of them played in any travel or anything like that. And they had a wonderful time with it. So thank you for the compliment, but it's something that I learned from many years of mistake, having conversations with my family, seeing the errors of my way, and the
Yeah.
spiritual journey with God of
Yeah.
what is really important in life.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, Chris. Let's make a little transition here and talk a little bit about what have you learned about grief? Because you've been on this journey now for 5 years. And for you, not only were you impacted by the loss of your son, but anytime there's a loss that's due to an event such as suicide or a sudden death, there's an added layer of trauma to that. And none of us ever expect to be there as a parent. You know, you grow up as a parent understanding that one day your kids will bury you, but the thought never occurs to you really. I mean, we don't think about the fact that we might bury our kids. So what is it that you've learned about grief that you want other people to understand better? Because so many don't if they haven't been there. And of course they don't.
Right. And you're right to say that as parents, we never think we're going to bury our children. I read a book, Lament of a Son. It was written by a Yale theologian many years ago, and he lost his son. And he talks about when we lose a parent, we lose part of our past. But when we
Right.
lose a child, we're losing part of our future. And we all have this Norman Rockwell view of what life is going to be like with our children. They're going to get married, they're going to have kids. When we eventually end our life, they'll all be surrounded by us. And it's all very Norman Rockwellian.
Yep.
When we lose a child, and then when you lose a child to suicide specifically, the loss is devastating, and whether you lose a child to suicide or lose a child to a disease or whatever the case may be, an accident, we sit here as parents and go, my future is changed forever.
Right.
How do I go on with a different future that is so different than what we had? And it is a challenge, and it's still a challenge for me, 5 years out. But a woman said something to me. She had lost her daughter to suicide 20 years ago. And I think it does describe it perfectly. When you lose a child, you now have this overcoat on you. And that overcoat you wear every single day for the rest of your life. And at times, that overcoat gets very heavy. She calls them hot days. And those hot days can happen in January or they can happen in July. But those are days that the coat is almost make us impossible to get up and walk. But then there are other days that we are used to wearing the heavy overcoat. And we go on with life, but the heavy overcoat is always there. And I think that's what I've learned is I am never going to be Chris Locke before July 18th ever again. I am now Chris Locke post July 18th, 2018. I look at the world differently. I look at grief differently. I look at when I hear someone passes away, whether it's suicide or disease, or whatever, my empathy is greater than it ever was before I lost Sean. So I think that's what grief tells me. I think I'm currently reading a book right now talking about what does one do with tragedy, and I'm only 4 chapters in, but he talks about we have to walk through the darkness to eventually get to the light. And there's 2 ways to walk towards a light. The sun sets on the west, but the sun rises on the east. The shorter journey to light is to walk back to the east and see the sunrise. And therefore, we have to walk through darkness. And I don't think the darkness ends, but I think hopefully you find the light to get you through those dark times. And, there are days that I feel like I'm my normal self, but there are days that it's really hard to this, and it affects, as you and I as dads, it affects our relationship with our other children. It affects our relationship with our wives,
Sure.
I'm going through a journey right now that I've come to realize because my children and wife have shared with me that I've been pretty much mad for the last 5 years. I didn't think I was, but obviously I was. And it's probably true. And then you ask, well, who are you mad about? Why are you mad? And I talked to one of my friends who's a pastor, and he asked me that question. My first reaction was, I'm mad at Sean. I'm mad that he ended life, that he didn't come to me, that he didn't think my love was enough to help him get through what he was going through. I'm also mad at God. God, why did you do this? I thought I was living the life you wanted me to live. Why are you putting me through this pain? But then after a couple of days reflecting, really, the person I'm most mad at is myself. I'm mad at myself because I couldn't stop it. I thought I was in control. And when you lose a child suddenly, or watch your child die from a horrible disease, you realize, God, I'm not in control. And that gets you onto a journey spiritually going, okay, what do I do with this? How do I come through the darkness and try to live a life with the tragedy we all deal with?
Yeah, man, that is so well said. And I've experienced a lot of that myself. And I think that the anger is very common in dads who have lost a child. It seems to express itself in the anger rather than just sometimes in the very tender emotions that I think our wives tend to experience more often. And I think it leads me to another aspect of grief, and that's the physical impact. What was that like for you, Chris, and especially in the early days and weeks and even months after losing Sean?
Sleep deprivation. I could not sleep. I already had sleep issues before we lost Sean,
Yeah.
just being a type A intense visual that I am. But that was tough. You're sitting there at 2:00 in the morning, 4:00 in the morning, you're staring at his picture, and you're by yourself. The house is quiet, so you deal with that. And then
Yeah.
I knew enough not to self-medicate myself through alcohol, but I know so many people that did. So I self-medicated through ice cream and pretzels, and you know, and that's not good for one's physical health. So I'm dealing with that on a pretty much daily basis at this point.
But it
Um,
feels better, right?
oh, for the moment it does,
Yeah,
absolutely. Um,
right.
but then it's just, you get into this whole reflection. I mean, it definitely affected me mentally. I mean, that first year was pretty dark. I remember we had lost Sean in July. That first Christmas, I was kind of going through with emotions. I had a smile on my face, trying to make sure everybody was, dealing with the holidays as best as we could. But I remember a couple days saying to my wife, a couple days after, I could see how Sean did it, how you could put a mask in front of you that
Yeah.
everything was okay, but deep down inside, you were suffering immense pain. And that was the first year. It was tough. Luckily, listening to my wife and daughter, I started seeing a therapist. He's been extremely helpful. Still see him to this day, and he gives me the tools to kind of deal with those moments.
Yeah.
So I would encourage anybody who has lost a child, see a therapist. And it's tough and it's hard work. And believe me, I'm still not there. And I've had my ebbs and flows, and we had to deal with COVID when you couldn't see a therapist,
Yeah.
person and all that. And I'm not really an online sort of guy, so, but it does help. They do give you tools to get through those dark nights, dark days, whether it's breathing exercises, reading books, whatever the case may be, to really get you through it. So it was through therapy that I still have those nights, but I don't have them as often as I used to.
Yeah. And I concur with you. I think it's very important if you have the ability to, if you have the financial resources to, I would encourage somebody listening today, if you're not, please try to get connected with a good grief counselor. But you need to find somebody who really does know how to counsel people who are going through a season of grief. Not everybody is particularly good at that.
Right.
Not all counselors are well trained in that.
That's exactly right. As well as pastors. There are some great pastors that,
Yeah.
priests that can be very good at it. And there are some that are not. Like anything in life, people have certain skill sets that they're good at and some that are not so good at it. So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I encourage those people to keep on looking for that right person because you will find someone that you can open up to. Friends are huge. I have some very good friends who have been with me since day one. My wife being
Yeah.
my best friend, but
Yeah.
also guys who I can go and have lunch with, a cup of tea, a cup of coffee with, and say, hey, man, I just need to talk for an hour. And they
Yeah.
have been through the journey with me. And if they listen to this, they know who they are. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about that for a minute. When you think back to those hours, days, weeks right after losing Sean, what stands out to you, Chris, the most? Had the greatest impact on you as far as just comfort and reassurance and knowing that you're going to, as hard as it is right now, as much as it hurts, I think I'm going to make it because, and you fill in the blank, because of these people that were in your life. What was it that they did right?
So I'm going to take it two ways. So first, I never felt such pain and loss than the morning I woke up right after Sean had passed away. And I
Yeah.
always, whenever I hear a parent who's lost a child, I recall that morning where I literally woke up and I felt like I was running down the street in just pain and yelling. I
Yeah.
never thought I was ever going to feel such loss and pain like I did that day, and never thinking I was going to recover from that loss and pain that I felt that morning. The simple answer is how do you get through it is from the love of those who love you, whether
Yeah.
that is your immediate family, and because they're there for you, but they all are going to grieve differently than you. So you have to accept that they're not going to feel the same things you feel because it's just a different grief process. But it's the love of friends too. It's just being able to look at someone and they say, I got your back today. I know you're having a tough day. That's one thing my therapist has told me. My wife can now look at me and go, having a tough day today? And say, yeah. It could be a song that came on the radio, something on TV, a thought, who knows? But it's really love. And I look at the people in my lives who have been there, who are willing to have these conversations, because these are tough conversations. And most people don't want to have these conversations because
no, they don't.
To have this conversation, they have to kind of delve into their worst nightmare, which is losing their child. So they're watching you and what that goes through, and they go, God, this is so tough. I don't think I can deal with it. But those who hung in, they are truly gifts from God.
No kidding.
God put in my life to help me get through it. And Greg, I can tell you the times that I feel like I can't go another day, God brings one of those people into my life, either through a text message, a phone call, or whatever. And I was like, okay, thank you, God. Thank you. I'll get through another day. And that's how you get through this. You have to go through another day because so many people love you.
Yeah, those people become treasures.
Treasures.
Because, as you said, they are gifts from God. And that's how often God shows up in tragedy like that, by sending somebody. They just seem to show up out of the blue, as it were. And as believers, we know that there's no such thing as just happenstance in our lives. God arranges things like that because he knows what we need in the moment. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because there are so many people in your life and in ours. They know who they are.
Yep.
And to say that we love them and treasure them is such an understatement.
Yep. Absolutely. And God does send you, whether it's people, whatever, sometimes I'll not want to go to church on Sunday, and I drag my butt to church because, and it's amazing how that is the exact sermon or homily I need at that moment. And it's amazing how many times God has been there over these last 5 years to say, I got your back. Now I will tell you though, honestly, I did go through a crisis of faith too. I
not
did.
Uncommon.
Right. I mean, I was silent for a long time. There are still days that I am silent with God because, I read something recently that Paul wrote to the Romans that when you're going through grief, the dumbness of how to verbalize what you're going through to God is okay. It doesn't mean you have a lack of faith. That's when God will draw closest to you.
Yeah. And he
I
also reminded us, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I'll lose the thought if I don't interject it right now. In line with what you were just saying, it also talks about, in I think it's in Romans, how when we are unable to pray, the Holy Spirit prays for us.
That's exactly right.
Because there are times when we just can't. I know what you're saying.
And that's when God can be closest to us as well, because he is saying, I got you. I have this picture in my office of Jesus with his arms wide open. And, he's there to hug us. And it's those moments that you do feel Christ's hug and God's hug say, I'll get you through this right now. I'll tell you a story about 2 days after we lost Sean. I was raised Catholic. Sean was raised Catholic. And I'm on my own journey spiritually right now. But back in the day, Catholicism taught that suicide was a mortal sin. And I remember back my confirmation days, that thought, and I was really hyper-focused on that a couple days after losing. And Sister John Elizabeth, who's the principal of his elementary school, called me. And I expressed that to her. And she said, well, first, that's not Catholicism. That was something that happened and it was wrong. But she said, when Sean was at his lowest point, when he was at his darkest moment in despair, that is when God was closest to him. That has stuck with me forever. And I think she's totally right because I have now felt that myself when I've been at my darkest and most despair moment. That is when I felt God the most. So
Yeah.
100% right.
Yeah. He shows up in those dark moments when we are in desperation for him to show up. Well, Chris, thank you so very much for sharing such a sweet story about Sean, for sharing so openly and honestly about your journey, for letting us get a glimpse into what those last 5 years have been like. That I think a lot of people are going to be encouraged because of your message today, because of Sean's life. And we talked about this, I think, when we talked one off a couple of weeks ago, that our boys now are still touching people's lives,
Yep.
maybe more so than when they were here with us.
Yep.
And so that's something that we can be thankful for, because as people hear what's happened in our lives as a result of their lives, I think it offers a ray of hope today that maybe somebody needed to hear.
I totally agree. And this is why I agreed to do your podcast, because what you're doing is so important, because so many people had come to me who had lost a child and were there for me during those moments and still
Yeah.
are to this day. And that's why we're doing this. And this is why I think what you're doing is so important, because there will be a parent out there that may hear this. And hopefully they can learn something from it to get them through the darkness that they're dealing with right now. So I thank you
Yeah.
for doing this. So,
Well, it is indeed a privilege. And Chris, one more time, tell us again about the foundation, about Sean's house, so that if somebody's listening today that wants to learn more, tell them how to find out more, and if there's anything that, if there are ways to get involved.
so the foundation is called SL24, which was Sean Locke 24 was his number. That's the foundation. And we have three missions: educate, which is part of what we're doing today, assist. So we help young adults find mental health resources in our community so they don't have to suffer in silence. If they financially cannot be able to pay for a mental health professional, we will pay for it. No questions asked, for as long as they need it. And then a support, which is Sean's house, which is a place. It was actually Sean's house. He lived in this house for 3 years when he was a college athlete. And it's a place for young adults, age 14 to 24, but we've had them come in as young as 9 and as old as 36 to have that first conversation. And it is a place that definitely has the spirit of the Lord in it, because people come in. Sometimes they come in and they'll say nothing to anybody for 6 weeks and then finally ask for help. And they can hang out and get cookies and sodas and food and whatever the case may be. And sometimes they come through the threshold door and they literally fall into our arms crying, saying, I need help. We've had 20,000 people come through the doors in 3 years. We have a peer program that we've trained about 200 young adults to be peers who have real lived experiences. So we've had about 4,500 use that peer program. And last week, we saved our 99th person who were dealing with suicide, who was in a crisis moment. And they come here and we get them the help. The house is open 24/7, and everything we do here is free of charge. So you can either go on SL24 or Sean's house, and you can find out more information about the programs. And, for those who are listening, if you have a child that needs help, call us. We may not know somebody in your state, but hopefully we can guide you and point you in the right direction.
That is such good stuff, Chris, and it's such important work. Thank you for what you guys are doing. Those are some amazing statistics in just what you said, 3 years, right?
Years of running insurances. Yeah, well, it'll be our third year, October 1st. And it shows you, and we had no idea. We had no idea so many kids were dealing with stuff. Of course, COVID has wreaked havoc on our young adults like never before. But yeah, so it shows the need for a place like this. And it's seeing the community respond. I mean, none of this is possible without the tremendous support of so many people in our community. We'll open up the front door and someone will have put some food out there for us, or a case of bottled water, or a check. It's just an amazing thing to see God's grace in so many people, and we see it every single day.
Wow, man. Well, God bless you, and God bless the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you for the work you're doing.
It's a privilege. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, thank you.
If you find our podcast meaningful, we invite you to follow us so that you can automatically receive the latest episodes. Also, we'd like to invite you to contact us and talk with us about sharing your story on a future episode, because every story is important and matters to God. Please reach out via email at hope@emptychairendeavor.com. That's hope@emptychairendeavor.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening